The answer came unexpectedly, from his own craft. While reviewing the gallery's website, Julian noticed an announcement. A charity gala hosted by the Whitmores, with all proceeds going to the Asheville Arts Foundation. Gerald was on the board. Diane was chairing the event. And the centerpiece of the gala? A photography exhibition, showcasing local talent. Julian's lips curved into a slow, deliberate smile. Fate had handed him the perfect stage. He would enter their world, the glittering halls they thought they owned, and turn their weapons against them. Not with fists, not with money, not with power, with photographs, with recordings, with truth, framed so perfectly that no one could look away. For the first time in weeks, Julian felt not fear, but anticipation. The trap was set, and the Whitmores were walking straight into it. The night of the gala shimmered with opulence. Strings of white lights twined around marble columns, crystal chandeliers glittered above the ballroom, and the hum of polite conversation filled the air like a rehearsed symphony. The Whitmores thrived in environments like this, arenas of wealth and influence where every smile was a transaction and every compliment a calculated move. Julian arrived dressed sharply, his dark suit tailored but understated. He carried his camera bag slung casually over his shoulder. To most, he looked like just another photographer covering the event. To Julian, it was armor. Behind the lens, he had always felt invisible yet powerful. Tonight, that paradox would be his weapon. Haley walked beside him, radiant in an emerald green dress. She'd insisted on coming, even after Julian warned her this night wasn't just about art, it was about confrontation. "They'll be on their best behavior," Haley whispered as they ascended the grand staircase. "They always are at these events. But if you're right, if you have what you say you have, this will crush them." Julian's hand brushed hers, steadying her. "I don't want to crush them," he said softly. "I want to free you from them." Inside the ballroom, Diane commanded the space like royalty. Draped in sapphire silk, her diamonds catching every flicker of light, she greeted guests with a graciousness so polished it gleamed. Gerald was no less commanding, shaking hands, laughing heartily, weaving effortlessly among bankers, judges, and socialites. "Ah, Julian," Gerald's booming voice carried across the room as they approached. "So glad you could make it. Covering the event for the paper, are you?" Julian forced a smile. "Something like that." Diane's eyes slid to Haley, narrowing almost imperceptibly before stretching into a smile. "Darling, you look lovely. You really should come to fittings with me sometime. The right cut can do wonders." Haley stiffened but said nothing. She didn't need to. Tonight wasn't about trading barbs. Tonight was about revelation. The gala proceeded as expected. Wine glasses clinked, a string quartet played, speeches lauded the Whitmores' generosity. Julian waited, patient as ever, the hunter in the underbrush. He captured photos of guests, of Gerald shaking hands with donors, of Diane whispering in influential ears. Every shot framed the world they had constructed, perfect, untouchable, admired. Until the exhibition began, a hush fell as the lights dimmed and a screen was lowered at the front of the ballroom. This was the Whitmores' moment, a slideshow of curated photographs celebrating Asheville's artistic spirit. But Julian had arranged something different. Thanks to a quiet conversation with the event's AV coordinator, and the promise of a generous donation, Julian's file had been loaded into the sequence. The first images were innocuous. Landscapes, portraits, the kind of work expected at a fundraiser. Then the sequence shifted. A photograph of Gerald shaking hands with Adrian Cole, the private investigator, filled the screen. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The next slide. Diane in her kitchen, vial in hand, tilting it over a glass. Gasps. A few startled whispers. Julian's pulse pounded. Every instinct screamed to slow down, to savor the unraveling. The next slide was no photograph at all, but video. A grainy clip from Vanessa's hidden camera, Diane's voice clear as crystal. "We're just guiding things along." Julian's unstable. "Haley will see it soon enough." The ballroom erupted. Conversations clashed, confusion buzzed, heads turned sharply toward Diane, who sat frozen, face drained of color. "Turn that off," she shrieked, leaping to her feet. But the next clip rolled on. Adrian Cole's smug confession. We've done exactly that. Plant seeds of doubt, isolate the target, make the spouse turn. It's beautiful, really. They destroy themselves for you. Gerald surged to his feet, barking, this is outrageous. Fabricated slander. Cut it, now. But the final clip silenced even him. Gerald's own voice, recorded in his study, dripping with contempt. Haley will come home where she belongs. History repeats, son. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every guest in the ballroom stared, their curated illusions shattered. Diane's hand trembled against her necklace. Gerald's jaw worked furiously, his mask of control slipping. And then Haley rose. For the first time in her life, she addressed her parents not as supplicant, not as daughter eager for approval, but as judge and witness. Enough. Her voice was steady, carrying across the stunned room. I've spent years letting you control me. Letting you decide who was good enough, what was right for me, who I should love. But this? Drugging my husband? Hiring people to destroy our marriage? That ends tonight. Diane sputtered, Haley, darling, you don't understand. No, Mother, I finally do. Haley's eyes glistened, but her chin was high. You wanted everyone to see Julian as weak, unstable. But what you've really shown tonight is who you are. Manipulative, cruel, afraid of losing control. The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were watching with rapt fascination, some in horror, some with thinly veiled delight at the Whitmore's downfall. Gerald's fists clenched. You think this proves anything? These people are our friends. They know us. They'll believe us over some petty photographer. Julian stepped forward at last, his voice calm, cutting through the tension like a blade. Then let them decide. Every guest here has a copy of the files on their phones. Courtesy of a timed email sent the moment the presentation began. No more secrets. No more control. As if on cue, phones began buzzing across the ballroom. Guests pulled them out, scrolling, eyes widening. The evidence was undeniable. The Whitmore's empire of influence had cracked, live, in front of their entire social world. And for the first time, Julian felt the shift. He wasn't the outsider anymore. He wasn't the one on trial. They were. The gala dissolved into chaos. Some guests slipped out, eager to avoid the fallout. Others hovered, whispering, savoring the scandal. Diane collapsed into a chair, pale as marble. Gerald stormed toward Julian, rage boiling in every step, until Owen intercepted him, shoving a hand into his father's chest. Enough, Dad, we've all seen it now. Stop embarrassing yourself. The words landed like a slap. Gerald faltered, eyes darting between his son and the crowd. For once, Julian didn't lift his camera. He didn't need to capture this moment. He would remember it forever. The morning after the gala, Asheville buzzed like a hive rattled by a stick. The scandal had spread beyond the ballroom. It had leapt into headlines, blogs, whispers in coffee shops, murmurs at business lunches. Whitmore family exposed in sabotage scandal. Philanthropy gala erupts in chaos. Secrets behind the city's power couple. Julian sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling in his hands, watching the coverage unfold on his laptop. Reporters had already pieced together fragments of the recordings, blending them with speculation and context. The photos of Gerald with Adrian Cole had gone viral. Diane's words, "We're just guiding things along," were replayed like a sinister mantra. For years, the Whitmores had defined the narrative of Asheville's elite. Now, they were the narrative, unraveling in real time. Haley entered, still in her robe, her hair unbrushed but her eyes clear. She kissed Julian's temple and sat across from him. "They'll come after you," she said quietly. "I know. They'll say it's fake, that you edited the footage, that you doctored the audio." Julian gave a dry laugh. "They already are, but denial only works if the evidence is weak. And ours isn't." Haley's hand slid over his. "Julian, I'm proud of you, for fighting back, for showing them they couldn't break us." Her voice cracked, but her grip was firm. "I just didn't realize it would be this big." Julian didn't admit it, but he hadn't either. He'd wanted truth, justice, vindication. What he got was a storm, and storms didn't care who they tore apart. That afternoon, the fallout became personal. Vanessa called, her voice tight. "It's happening. Gerald's board voted him out this morning. They said his judgment is compromised. He's furious. Diane's PR team tried spinning the gala as a technical sabotage, but no one's buying it. They're bleeding influence by the hour. Julian pinched the bridge of his nose. And Owen? There was a pause. Conflicted, he confronted Gerald after the gala, but he's still his father. He'll take time. Thank you, Vanessa, Julian said. For everything. Without you, none of this would have worked. I didn't do it for you, Vanessa replied softly. I did it because no one else ever stood up to them. You did, and I wasn't going to let you do it alone. Julian felt a weight in her words. She had lived under their thumb longer than he had. This wasn't just his victory, it was hers too. But victories came at a cost. That evening, as Julian walked to his studio, he noticed a black car idling across the street. Its windows were tinted, its engine running. When he glanced back 10 minutes later, it was gone. The next day, his email inbox flooded with anonymous threats. You'll regret this. Dead men can't take pictures. Stay out of Asheville business. Julian forwarded them to the police, but he knew how influence worked. The Whitmores might be wounded, but they weren't finished. Gerald didn't climb to the top by surrendering. Haley wanted to believe they were safe now, free at last. Julian wished he could believe it, too. But every instinct told him the Whitmores had one last card to play. That card revealed itself 3 nights later. Julian returned home to find Haley sitting on the couch, a letter trembling in her hands. It was delivered by courier, she whispered. Julian took it, unfolded the heavy stationery, and read. To Mr. Julian Mercer, you have made a grave mistake. The words were brief, but the signature chilled him. Gerald Whitmore. Attached was a legal notice. A preliminary filing for defamation. The Whitmores weren't just going to deny, they were going to sue. Julian exhaled sharply. Of course, when power fails, they turn to law. Haley's face was pale. Can they win? Julian folded the letter slowly. They can try, but the truth is on our side. And this time, I'm not backing down. The weeks that followed were a blur of depositions, interviews, and strategy sessions. Reporters hounded Julian for statements. Activists praised him for dismantling elite corruption. Others accused him of seeking attention, of exploiting family drama for fame. But through it all, Julian focused on one truth. Every attempt the Whitmores made to strike back only deepened the public's suspicion. Their denials sounded desperate, their countersuits looked vindictive, and slowly, inexorably, the balance of power shifted. Julian was no longer the outsider with a camera. He was the man who had stood against Asheville's most powerful family, and survived. Yet for all the chaos, the real victory was private. One quiet evening, as Haley sat curled against him on the couch, she whispered, Do you realize what you did? You gave me back my voice. My choices. For the first time in my life, I feel free. Julian kissed her hair, holding her close. That was all I ever wanted. Not to win, just to give us a chance. And though the storm still raged outside, for the first time in years, Julian felt a peace he had only ever glimpsed through the viewfinder, fleeting, fragile, but real. The Whitmores weren't finished, they never would be, but neither was he, and now, finally, he was ready. Julian had thought the gala would be the end. He pictured Gerald and Diane retreating into the shadows of their crumbling reputation, licking their wounds in silence. But the Whitmores were not the type to retreat. They counterattacked. Within a week of the defamation filing, their influence began to stir again. Gerald still had friends, judges, bankers, old colleagues who owed him favors. Diane had connections in media, social clubs, the philanthropic network that shaped Asheville's perception of itself. The story, once clear, began to muddy. Local photographer fabricates scandal, sources claim. Whitmore family victims of elaborate hoax? Marriage drama at center of social uproar. Julian read the headlines with a grim sense of déjà vu. They were doing what they'd always done, rewriting the narrative, bending reality to their will. The difference was, this time, Julian had evidence. Hard evidence. But evidence was useless if no one believed it. The first deposition felt like walking into a trap. Gerald's attorneys sat across the table, their tailored suits as sharp as knives. Gerald himself leaned back, calm, almost smug, as if the entire gala scandal had been an inconvenience easily swept away. "Mr. Mercer," one of the lawyers began, "is it true that you have a history of professional jealousy toward your father-in-law?" Julian blinked. "Jealousy? You're a freelance photographer. Mr. Whitmore is a respected financier. Would you say you've ever resented his success?" Julian forced a steady breath. "No, I resent his interference in my marriage." "There's a difference," the lawyer smirked. "We'll let the record reflect your opinion." Across the table, Gerald's lips twitched. He was enjoying this. Outside the deposition room, Haley squeezed Julian's arm. "They're trying to rattle you," she whispered. "Don't let them." Julian nodded, though his stomach churned. It wasn't the questions that bothered him. It was Gerald's confidence. It was Gerald's confidence. The man looked like he was already winning. And maybe he was. Because while Julian fought in rooms with lawyers, Gerald and Diane fought on another battlefield. Haley's heart. It began with phone calls. "Haley, darling, you can't let him drag you down with him. We only ever wanted the best for you. Julian has twisted everything, don't you see? He's isolating you, turning you against your family." At first, Haley ignored them. But the persistence wore on her. She'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, torn between anger and guilt. "They'll never stop," she muttered one evening, tossing her phone aside. "They're like vines. Always creeping back in." Julian wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Then we cut them back. Every time, until there's nothing left." But he knew it wasn't that simple. Blood ties had roots deeper than logic. The next blow came from an unexpected angle. Julian lost a client, then another, then 3 in the same week. A luxury resort canceled his contract for a landscape series. A magazine he'd worked with for years suddenly shifted editorial direction. Even a wedding shoot was postponed indefinitely. When Julian pressed for answers, he got the same vague response: "We're just not comfortable right now." And then, from a sympathetic editor who dared to be honest: "Julian, your name is toxic at the moment." "I'm sorry." Julian slammed his fist against his desk, the sound echoing in his studio. This wasn't coincidence. This was Gerald. They weren't just attacking his reputation. They were dismantling his livelihood. That night, Julian stared at his reflection in the dark window of his studio. He looked tired, older, the kind of man beaten down by a fight he never asked for. For a moment, he thought of giving in, dropping the case, letting the Whitmores win, if only to reclaim peace. But then he remembered Haley's words: "You gave me back my voice." And he knew he couldn't surrender. Julian needed leverage. He found it in the unlikeliest place: Vanessa again. She arrived at his studio one rainy afternoon, a USB drive in her hand. "They're targeting you just like they targeted me," she said. "But I found something Gerald never wanted anyone to see." Julian plugged in the drive. Up popped documents, financial records, transfers to offshore accounts, suspicious, charitable donations funneled back into shell companies. "Embezzlement?" Julian whispered. "Fraud," Vanessa confirmed. "If this goes public, Gerald won't just lose face. He'll lose everything." Julian stared at the screen, the rain pounding harder outside. This was nuclear, evidence that could end Gerald's career, his freedom. But was he willing to use it? That night, Julian showed Haley. Her face went pale. "If this comes out, he could go to prison." Julian hesitated. "Do you care?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't know. He's my father, but he's also a monster. What he's done to us, to me. I can't keep forgiving it." Her voice cracked. "Julian, if you use this, there's no going back. No fixing what's left of my family." Julian took her hand. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe what's left isn't worth fixing." They sat in silence, the decision hanging between them like a blade. Meanwhile, the Whitmores escalated again. One night, Julian returned home to find their front door ajar. Inside, the house was ransacked, drawers overturned, photographs shredded, his camera lenses smashed on the floor. Haley stood frozen in the living room, shaking. "They wouldn't." Julian pulled her close. "They would. They're sending a message." On the wall, scrawled in red marker, were 3 chilling words: "Stop or else." Julian called the police. The officer took notes, promised an investigation, but his expression said everything. he didn't expect results. Julian knew why. Gerald's influence reached everywhere, even in uniforms. But Julian also knew something else. They were scared. The break-in wasn't power. It was desperation, and desperate people made mistakes. 2 nights later, Julian got a phone call from a blocked number. A familiar voice spoke, smooth, controlled, venomous. "Julian, you think you've won. You think evidence matters. But in this world, only power matters. And you'll never have enough of it." Julian recognized Gerald instantly. He almost hung up, almost. But instead, he said, "You're right. I don't have your money. I don't have your influence. But I have something you'll never understand." "Oh?" Gerald sneered. Julian's grip tightened on the phone. "The truth. And people who believe in it. That's more dangerous than anything you've got." Gerald's laugh was low, cold. "Then prepare to be destroyed by it." The line went dead. Julian stared at the phone, his pulse hammering. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Julian didn't sleep. The red scrawl on the living room wall, "Stop or else," burned into his thoughts long after the police had left. He sat at his desk until dawn, the glow of the monitor painting his face in pale blue. On the screen, the folder Vanessa had given him waited like a loaded gun. Bank records, shell companies, offshore accounts, every detail meticulously linked back to Gerald Whitmore. He had enough to bury the man. But the cost. Julian shut the laptop and rubbed his temples. His chest felt tight, like every breath was a battle. The next morning, Haley found him staring into a cold mug of coffee. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. Julian shook his head. "How could I? This isn't just about us anymore. If I pull the trigger, Gerald won't just fall. He'll take the whole Whitmore name with him. Your mother, your sister, everyone tied to him." Haley leaned against the counter, arms folded. Her face was pale but steady. "And if you don't?" she asked. Julian met her gaze. "Then he wins. Again." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Haley whispered, "I want it to end, Julian. I want to stop being afraid every time the phone rings. I want to stop second-guessing my own family. If the only way is through fire, then burn it down." Her voice trembled at the last words, but her eyes didn't waver. Julian reached for her hand. For the first time, he realized she wasn't the same woman who had once defended her parents at all costs. She was hardened now, changed. Maybe they both were. 2 days later, the Whitmores struck again. Julian was on his way back from a client meeting, one of the rare few who still trusted him, when he noticed the car behind him. Dark sedan, same one he'd seen in his neighborhood a week earlier. He turned left. So did they. He slowed. They slowed. By the third turn, his pulse was thundering. Julian pulled into a gas station, parked, and stepped out, phone in hand. The sedan slowed near the entrance, idled for a moment, then rolled past without stopping. Julian snapped a photo of the license plate. His hands shook as he texted it to Vanessa with 2 words, "Check this." He knew in his gut who it belonged to. That night, Vanessa called. "You're right, registered to a shell corporation. Guess who's the listed director?" Julian didn't need to ask. Gerald, or one of his proxies. But yes, he's watching you, Julian. And he's sloppy enough to leave a trail. Julian's jaw tightened. Gerald wasn't just harassing them. He was escalating. And if Gerald was willing to intimidate him on the road, it meant one thing. They were close to panic. The financial evidence had them cornered. Haley broke first, not in front of Julian, but alone. He found her one evening on the porch swing, shoulders shaking, her phone clutched in her lap. "Haley?" She looked up, eyes red. "It's my mom. She called today. Said I need to stop letting you poison me. She said if I don't leave you, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Julian sat beside her. The porch creaked under his weight. "She's scared," he said quietly. "They both are. They're losing control of you." Haley's laugh was bitter. Control. That's all it ever was. Not love, not family, just control. She wiped her face with her sleeve. "Julian, I can't do this anymore. If you have what you say you have, if you can finish this, then do it. Please, end it." Her voice cracked into a sob. "Before they destroy me too." Julian pulled her into his arms. He'd wanted her blessing, her certainty. Now he had it, and it felt like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. The following morning, Julian acted. He printed hard copies of the financial records, filled a manila envelope, and drove downtown to the county courthouse. His hands trembled as he slid the envelope across the counter to the clerk. "Fraud, embezzlement," he said. "This needs to go to the district attorney." The clerk raised an eyebrow but nodded, stamping the papers with a heavy thud. As Julian walked out into the sunlight, his knees nearly buckled. It was done. The die was cast. There was no going back now. The Whitmores didn't take long to respond. That evening, Diane appeared at their doorstep. Not Gerald, Diane, elegant as ever, though her face was drawn tight with something rawer than Julian had ever seen, desperation. "Haley," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." "Please." Julian moved to block the doorway. "You're not welcome here." Diane's eyes flicked to him, then back to her daughter. "Haley, I beg you. Think about what you're doing. This isn't just about your father. It's about all of us. About family." Haley's voice was flat. "Family doesn't threaten me. Family doesn't stalk me. Family doesn't try to ruin my husband's life." Tears welled in Diane's eyes. "You don't understand. If this goes forward, your father could go to prison. Everything we've built, all of it, gone." "Then maybe it should be," Haley whispered. For the first time, Julian saw Diane falter. The mask slipped. Her voice broke. "He's still your father," she whispered. "And I'm still your mother." Haley's face was stone. "Then act like it." She shut the door in her mother's face. On the other side, they heard Diane's sobs before the sound of heels retreating down the walkway. Julian wrapped his arms around Haley, but his own chest felt hollow. Because despite everything, a small part of him still ached for her. For the daughter who had finally chosen herself, and the parents who had forced her to. The next morning, the headlines hit. Whitmore family facing embezzlement investigation. Financial records tie prominent Asheville figure to fraud scheme. Julian's phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from reporters, emails from clients, messages from strangers thanking him for exposing corruption. He ignored them all, because as much as the world saw this as victory, Julian knew better. 2 nights later, Julian received a call from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Julian." Gerald's voice was sharp, stripped of its usual polish. "You've made a mistake you don't understand. The Whitmores weren't finished. Not yet." By the end of the week, news anchors were speaking Gerald Whitmore's name with a mixture of fascination and disdain. His face appeared on every channel, alongside graphics of offshore accounts, charts of shell corporations, arrows connecting him to Adrian Cole and a half-dozen other advisors. Julian watched from his studio, Eliza asleep in her crib, Haley beside him on the couch. Whitmore Industries declined to comment, the anchor said, but sources close to the family suggest Gerald Whitmore could face multiple felony charges. Federal investigators are expected to become involved in the coming days. Haley exhaled shakily. "It's real now." Julian didn't look away from the screen. It was always real, but Gerald didn't vanish into silence.